Alright, welcome back to Game 10 of Lucid's 2022 tournament, where we are playing Phlegra. It is turn 13, and I'm recording this from the future, so I will endeavor not to spoil anything. Our site searching does not pay off, as sometimes happens, and then we are, even though expansion is technically over, we're still trying to clear out a few independent provinces using our pretender. This swamp, is pretty weakly defended. I don't think we really have much to worry about here, especially because we have our gear and our spells. You know, without any gear and like any spells, militia, sadly, and light infantry can actually be a little dangerous to the Gorgon. Just like the piercing weapons really can be a problem, but at this point, she's got no trouble with it. So she clears that out for us with no trouble. And then we have another expansion. Yeah, we're just clearing out this forest. This is actually a pretty important forest because it connects to our fort. We talked about how that fort is having some resource problems. We brought quite a few Mouflon here. It's a pretty weak province. The crossbows, of course, we don't love, but there aren't very many of them, so we should roll this over quite easily. Quite a few commanders back here, but yeah, they're able to clean that out, no problem. And indeed, we take no losses. So that is at least on the plus side of things. We are larger than 12 provinces now, though it took us a little longer to get there. So unexpected events, I'm sure these will go well. Yeah, lose 20 province income, that definitely hurts. The Fairy Court, this could be worse. Misfortune 3, we don't care about that. Death 1 does kind of suck, but our scales will fix this. And then, yeah, people being sacrificed in the woods, but probably just a rumor. Right, those are usually just rumors. Nothing comes of them. We do lose a scout in Mictlan, so they are patrolling right away, and Mictlan can levy these slaves. They can capture these slaves for free. Does cause unrest for them, I believe. But yeah, they've jumped on top of it very quickly, and they have a group of them patrolling on their capital. So yeah, this is really good stuff. It doesn't really tell us anything, about what Mictlan is up to, and we lose a scout. So that's painful, but it does indicate that, Mictlan is aware of the patrolling game, and it's something to consider. And I'll catch you guys after the jump. All right, this is the situation and what we did about it. Let's go ahead and talk diplomacy first. Now, don't remember exactly when this happened, so we might be jumping the gun here by about a turn, but around this time, we got contacted by Mictlan offering a non-aggression pact 3, which we accepted. Mictlan they have a scary bless and can definitely be a scary nation, but they are also a nation that it only gets worse the later it goes. So in some ways, maybe should have gone for an early attack against them. However, at the time, we were also contacted around the exact same time by Midgard, and they wanted to know how we felt about an invasion against Xibalba, and definitely interested in that. You can see we, have a decent number of scouts moving into their territory. We have a decent number of scouts now moving around in general. The late age is filled with scout provinces. I'm actually in an early age game right now, and I would kill for this many scout provinces. I think we're recruiting 3 scouts. I know there's another scout over here somewhere. Yeah, here he is. So at least 3 scouts, maybe more, which perhaps is too many, but I like to see what's going on. So anyway, the Bats are also a similar nation to Mictlan in the sense that they get scarier the later it gets, but I think they're a little weaker earlier, so they are a more attractive target. In addition to the fact that the player piloting Midgard, I think, is probably one of the best players in the Dominions community, and in their opinion, the player of Mictlan is quite good. So when choosing, a 1v1, potentially we could convince someone else to come in against Mictlan, but we don't have any allies lined up at the moment. So, a 1v1 against someone who's probably a pretty good player with fairly scary bless and somewhat scary nation, or attacking the Bats in a 2v1 against a player of unknown skill. At least to myself, I was definitely leaning towards the Xibalba situation. Raga actually also reached out and offered a non-aggression pact, but we declined, at least for the moment, right? Saying this is still kind of a little early, which is true, right? And I am trying to be better about, not overcommitting to non-aggression pacts, and Raga doesn't actually look all that big. And Raga was actually the only nation, they're kind of what I used as a tester to try to put together the Gorgon to make sure that I wasn't going to get run over. And, while certainly things can go wrong, this Gorgon definitely does provide us some protection against Raga's sacreds specifically, depending of course on exactly what bless they're running. But yeah, Raga is really like the only nation where I'm like, okay, we probably at least have a fighting chance against them. I've more or less guaranteed that. So I felt, considering their size, and they're reaching out for a non-aggression pact, I didn't really feel the need to, jump into that right away. So for the moment, one non-aggression pact. Probably don't need to worry about aggression from Raga, considering they were offering a non-aggression pact. Have had fairly friendly relations with Atlantis, despite our miscommunications. But no non-aggression pact there. And, not a whole lot of contact with Xibalba, but, also somewhat productive. Like, we have divvied up provinces. So not really expecting an attack from Xibalba either, though you never know. And haven't really bothered. We don't have a non-aggression pact with Kalem, even though technically we boarded them. And we don't have a non-aggression pact with Ulm, again, even though technically we boarded them. Just not really expecting these players to try to launch like a really awkward war against us. So with the diplomacy out of the way, let's talk specifics for a second. Our recruitment remains more or less as we've talked about. Crossbowmen, getting more of these Cyclops Smith commanders. We'll see how that goes. More crossbowmen here in this fort. You can see this fort is in a much better place now that we have this other forest, though it's not exactly like crossbowmen are pouring out of this fort. Certainly would like a few more. But that's always true. Doing some site searching here with our pretender. Most of these other lines are, shuffling site searchers around. But we are making an attack against these barbarians. We are reinforcing this group. So we're sending in the 20 crossbowmen, 9 Mouflon. It should be enough, right? We have our prophet in here as well. So we'll see. Reasonably confident about that, but we definitely need to retake this province. That's a lot of income we're losing out on. Though, because our other fort is pretty late at this point, right, we still have 3 more turns before the palisade comes up. That's pretty rough. You can see that, we can't actually spend all of our gold, right? We still have 465 gold. This is not part of some plan. This is just because, right, we're resource constrained. And while the Cyclops Smiths are, like, decently expensive, our other mages are incredibly cheap, especially, like, the Shackled mages, quite cheap. Okay, maybe not incredibly cheap, but still pretty cheap at 70 gold. So yeah, we definitely need this other fort to come up, and then, hopefully once it is, we'll be able to spend our gold a little more effectively. Research-wise, we were headed to Conjuration 5, for the elementals, like nothing too exciting there. Like really the plan is, send fire elementals at Xibalba, backed up by our national troops, and, hopefully ride an easy 2v1, right? And we won't end up with the capital in all likelihood, but hopefully we won't have to do too much lifting. And, if we just pick up like these 5 provinces, like that'll put us in a pretty decent spot. Maybe, right, there's this throne here, which we know is independent. We don't know the status of this throne yet, but, if we take this from Xibalba, this would put us in a pretty decent spot to potentially pick up 2 thrones. And while that we would still only be on 1 capital at that point, I would feel decent at that point with that amount of territory and a couple of thrones under our belt. So like I said, a pretty simple plan, but hopefully an effective one, and I think that more or less covers turn 13. Alright, welcome back to Game 10 of Lucid's 2022 tournament, where we are playing Phlegra. It is turn 14, and this is also being recorded from the future. We have our first throne claims, not by us sadly, so I'm not sure who this is. This is Marignon, and the other claim here has got to be by Kalem. Our site searching did not work out for us, and we can also see kind of the first inklings that perhaps not everything is going to plan, at least in terms of Midgard offering a joint invasion of Xibalba, because we see a battle here between Utgard and Midgard. I can't remember if we have seen Utgard's Bless yet, but it is definitely relevant. And this is a pretty serious bless, depends on where you draw the line at Hell Bless, but I think this is definitely pushing the boundaries. Regeneration and Blood Bond, pretty good on Giants, right? Spread that damage out and regenerate it back up, and you have a lot of HP to begin with, but added on to that is Fortitude, so half damage without needing Earth, which is important, because I don't think Utgard gets much in the way of Earth. Not to mention, I'm not sure you can actually get Fortitude on your troops, other than through a bless. Perhaps there's some way, but I'm not recalling offhand. You can certainly get it through items and, spell casting on your commanders. But in terms of painting it, on a bunch of units, we're kind of looking at a bless. And these are all fairly expensive blesses. Blood Bond, not quite as expensive. Then they've also added on magic weapons, definitely relevant, especially since this looks like it's going to be focused on the sacreds, this build that is. And these guys definitely don't have magic weapons built in, so you're going to need them to kill ethereal things, so that makes sense. And then shock resistance 15. No fire resistance, which is definitely good for us. But the shock resistance is probably because normally these guys have a malice for shock damage, so they actually only end up with shock resistance 10, which isn't going to stop, well, normally wouldn't stop things like Thunderstrike. 10 shock resistance actually isn't all that much. But considering that they're giants, they have quite a few hit points here. Let's take a look at one of these guys. Yeah, 38 hit points, then with the Blood Bond, spreading that damage out, these guys could actually potentially survive a Thunderstrike. Not 2 Thunderstrikes, but, unlikely that a Thunderstrike is going to hit twice in the same place. I've heard people say that's not possible. It is not true, but it is pretty unlikely. Obviously, they're just going to roll over these poor fish people. One of them actually managed to get a net off, so that's nice. But, yeah, not a lot of mage support here. 2 mages, which actually for the early game here is a decent amount of mage support. We're still pretty early on, especially with a build like this, not likely to have a ton of research. But yeah, I would say that this is pretty concerning, and we'll have to talk to Midgard and see where they're at and what the situation is here. We witness a battle with Atlantis cleaning out some of their independents. I think there's blood mages, yeah, the bloodhenge druids, I think. So yeah, some foul spawn here, which aren't too good, but sometimes some of these guys have beams of death or various poison things. So these can be kind of nasty. Yeah, here comes blood rain. I think this is right. Yeah, blood rain. So that reduces the morale of all units on the field, but it looks like Atlantis brought enough stuff and enough dangerous stuff that they're able to take this out no problem. Just in case we haven't checked or you've forgotten, certainly I've forgotten, here is Atlantis's Bless. Looks more mage focused to me, though certainly the troops won't mind having some poison resistance. So while Atlantis did commit a lot of stuff, including 2 mages, they only take 2 losses, and I'd say that this is pretty clean. And then we have a battle against some barbarians here. I think we're sending, 20 crossbows? Yeah, and some Mouflon, along with our Prophet. But there's not too many barbarians here, so I think this will work out without too much trouble. We've talked before plenty of times about how crossbows aren't the best archers to be using against barbarians, but yeah. We might have lost a Mouflon there. No losses, so always happy about that. Only 28 barbarians, so, not the most amazing victory, but happy to take it, especially considering we didn't use any mage turns or gems. Then we have some unexpected events. Heavy rains, we lose half our tax income, and we lose some permanent province income, which definitely hurts. And then in Phlegra, well, what do you know? Some barbarian scouts seem to be preparing for a large-scale attack. Probably nothing will come of it, so, hopefully we should be doing some patrolling anyway in the capital. So hopefully we can turn that around without too much difficulty, and I'll catch you guys after the jump. All right, this is the situation and what we did about it. Not a ton to say about this turn. We're kind of continuing all the stuff that we were doing before, doubling down on the Cyclops Smiths and recruiting a bunch of crossbowmen. Same story over here, not the Smiths, just a mixture of our other national mages. It does look like we have a patrol going here. Not a fantastic patrol, just a bunch of crossbowmen, but when that gets added onto our province defense, that will hopefully be enough against barbarians. Depending on the size of the attack, that definitely could be overwhelmed, but it would have to be a pretty large one, so fairly confident we should be safe from any barbarians that do choose to appear. Just moving our pretender next door to do some more site searching. We have a pretty good idea of what Xibalba's territory is looking like, but we saw 1 stack of bats before, but we'd like to know a little bit more, so we're sending a scout in onto their capital. Good chance he'll be patrolled out, but we want to at least take a crack at seeing what we're going to be up against, assuming that we do jump into this war. Assuming that this war is even going on, because at least from our scouting, it's kind of hard to tell. We're not as familiar with these provinces, so it looks like, it's possible that Mikkelin just got a favorable border and hasn't actually kicked off the war. And as a minor spoiler, I don't realize it this turn. You're going to hear some confusion next turn, but this is Midgard's capital. There should be a fortification here, but there is not. So at this point, I could tell, okay, maybe things aren't going to go to plan in terms of an invasion of Xibalba. Possibly need to put that on hold because you're going to have to figure out something, right? This demands an answer and probably everything that you have available. But I actually think that this war is basically over, and we must have missed whatever major battle happened, because I wouldn't expect you to destroy your capital fortification unless you felt the game was lost and you just didn't want to give infrastructure to the person who was rushing you. So at this point, I'm not aware of how dire Midgard's situation is, but it's looking pretty dire considering there's no capital fort here. But we did notice, it was like, okay, well, probably they're going to go knock down this unfortified temple. Just didn't notice that this unfortified temple is actually in their capital. So we're also bouncing a scout off of this throne. We are, of course, interested in thrones. So, we figure, well, since this is Xibalba invasion is probably going to be delayed, maybe we'll just go for this throne. And then our research is going okay. We should have Conjuration 4 next turn, and then we won't be too far off from Conjuration 5. And we are getting a bit more sight on the wider world, but I don't think we've seen anything particularly interesting yet. We're trying to get a sense of okay, how big is Ulm? How big are some of our, neighbors' neighbors? And then we have a few scouts kind of even farther afield, so, we're starting to look at Vedheim's territory a little bit. And, we've seen bits and pieces of Gath, but we don't really know a whole lot about them. Marignon is also out here somewhere, and we don't really know anything about them either. And I guess as some final words, of note, because our dominion has spread a bit and because we got such unfavorable borders, really on most of our borders, some enemy territory, specifically Ragas, has fallen under our dominion. And we can see these are fairly nice provinces. So definitely a thought, we wouldn't mind picking this up, grabbing this throne kind of thing. We've talked before about, especially if we have a war with Xibalba, we want kind of a shape like this, and it would be nice to include these valuable provinces versus just this swamp. And of course, continuing to have problems spending our gold. This does seem to kind of be a feature, I don't know about a feature, but something that you might encounter playing late age Phlegra is that early on, it can be challenging to spend all of your gold because a lot of your units are cheap, and you haven't had some of the nasty events that are really going to gut your capital and your income. And of course, the unrest, hasn't built up to critical levels yet. And you're not supporting, in terms of upkeep, a bunch of tyrants. So yeah, we've talked before, this is definitely a problem of not having enough infrastructure up. So I do think late age Phlegra is probably a nation that wants to get, they're on the side of wanting more forts. And some of this is just due to the fact that we really don't have great places to put forts because we didn't expand very well. So, we could certainly throw a fort over in some of these farmlands, but they're very low resources and we don't own a lot of the connections. So it's we really kind of want to own, some of these forests would be nice. Now, of course, this is in Xibalba's cap circle. So yeah, it's a bit of a problem in the sense that Phlegra does care about spacing its forts out because resources are a big concern for it. Probably should be looking into mercenaries. Right now, the majority of the mercenaries are owned by Midgard. But yeah, this is something I just need to be better about as a player in general. But particularly, if you have a lot of spending money, take a look at the mercenaries. The swimming men can only be underwater, so they can only be recruited underwater. Not very useful for us. And yeah, I think that more or less covers turn 14.